I remember my name. I try to speak it aloud, to anchor myself to what I was, to prove that I still exist inside this thing I am becoming. My lips part. My throat contracts. Sound rises from somewhere deep within my chest, and for one desperate moment I believe I will hear my own voice, that single syllable that defined me for 37 years of mortal life and 2 centuries of service to the gods. The sound that emerges is not my voice. It is a wet, gurgling howl that echoes from throats I did not possess when I woke this morning. Multiple throats. 3, perhaps 4, resonating in disharmony like a choir of the damned singing different songs simultaneously. The noise scrapes against the inside of my skull, and I realize with crawling horror that I am hearing myself from the inside and the outside at once, that my consciousness has somehow expanded to occupy spaces in my flesh that should not exist. I kneel in the ashes of my last victory. Around me, the battlefield still smolders. The corpses of Imperial Guardsmen lie in scattered formation, their bodies twisted in the final postures of death. I killed them. I remember killing them. The memory is clear, sharp, recent. I was victorious. I was glorious. I raised my blade to the red sky and screamed praise to my God, and the warp trembled with approval. That was 3 hours ago. Now I kneel here, and my hands are wrong. I lift them before my face, and the movement feels strange, as though my arms have too many joints or not enough. My gauntlets have split along the seams, the blessed ceramite cracking like eggshell to accommodate what lies beneath. Skin ripples like liquid mercury, pale and translucent, revealing the dark shapes of muscles that slide and reconfigure with each passing heartbeat. I watch, transfixed, as my right hand begins to divide. The flesh between my fingers swells, bulges, then tears with a sound like wet fabric ripping. A new digit emerges, slick and pink, twitching as it finds its place among the others. 6 fingers now. No. 7. The new growths multiply even as I count them, sprouting from my palm like obscene flowers blooming in time-lapse. I try to close my hand into a fist, to prove I still command this body, but the fingers move independently, each one curling and uncurling to its own rhythm. One of them bends backward, the bone crackling as it folds against itself in a configuration that defies every law of anatomy I once knew. There is no pain. That is somehow worse than if there were. Pain would be familiar. Pain would be human. This is something else entirely. My armor groans and buckles. I feel it pressing against my torso, too tight now, straining to contain what I am becoming. Beneath the blessed plate, my ribs are shifting. I sense them moving like tectonic plates, grinding against each other, splitting and reforming in patterns that follow no rational design. My chest swells, collapses, swells again. With each breath, the rhythm changes. Sometimes I inhale through my mouth, sometimes through apertures that have opened along my neck. Sometimes I do not breathe at all, and yet I do not suffocate. I was a chaos champion, marked by Tzeentch, god of change, master of sorcery and transformation. I wore his favor like a crown. I commanded legions. I shattered worlds in his name. I believed I understood what it meant to serve the architect of fate, to embrace the eternal mutability of flesh and spirit. I understood nothing. The realization crawls through my fragmenting mind like ice through veins. Everything I thought I knew about transformation, about ascension, about the gifts of chaos, is revealed now as the delusion of a child playing with forces beyond comprehension. I thought mutation was power. I thought change meant evolution, that each gift brought me closer to apotheosis, to the glorious moment when I would shed this mortal form entirely and rise as something magnificent and eternal. I was wrong. This is not ascension. This is dissolution. My left arm convulses, the muscles spasming so violently that my elbow dislocates with a wet pop. But the arm does not fall limp. Instead, it continues to move, the joint reassembling itself in a new configuration, the bone piercing through skin, and then retreating, leaving behind a latticework of holes that weep clear fluid. Something writhes beneath the surface, pressing against the membrane of my flesh, like a creature trying to escape from inside a sack. I want to scream. I try to scream. But the sound that emerges from my multiple throats is laughter, high and keening, a noise I did not choose to make and cannot stop. My body is operating on instincts I do not recognize, responding to commands from a consciousness that is no longer entirely mine. I am still aware. That is the true horror. I am still here, still watching, still experiencing every moment of this transformation with perfect, agonizing clarity. My mind remains intact, even as my body betrays every principle of form and function. I remember who I was. I remember my name, though I can no longer speak it. I remember the oaths I swore, the victories I claimed, the moment I first pledged myself to the changer of ways. I remember believing I was special. Around me, the ashes of the battlefield swirl in patterns that hurt to observe. The wind carries whispers in languages I almost understand, words that slither into my ears and nest there like parasites. The sky above churns with colors that have no names, hues that exist only in the spaces between reality and nightmare. The warp is close here, too close. The veil between dimensions has worn thin, and I can feel the immaterium pressing against the material world, bleeding through, reshaping everything it touches, reshaping me. My spine arches suddenly, violently, bending backward until I am staring at the sky upside down. Vertebrae crack and multiply, each one splitting into 2, then 4, then 8, a geometric progression of bone that extends my torso like a serpent's body. I feel my legs begin to change, the knees reversing, the feet elongating into shapes that could never support human weight. And through it all, I remain conscious, aware, trapped inside a prison of flesh that refuses to remember what shape it should be. I try once more to speak my name, just once more, to prove that some part of me survives, that I have not been completely unmade. The sound that rises from my throat is not words. It is a symphony of agony and confusion, a chorus of voices that were never meant to harmonize, screaming in frequencies that shatter the air around me. And somewhere, in the spaces between the screams, I hear laughter. Not my own. The laughter of a god who has moved on to other entertainments, who has already forgotten the name of the champion he is unmaking. I remember my name, but soon I will not. That name, the one I can no longer speak, once carried weight across a dozen burning worlds. It was whispered in the halls of the Imperium with fear. It was screamed by the dying as I carved ruin through their ranks. It was spoken with reverence by those who followed me, the 43 souls who swore themselves to my warband and to the vision I promised them. I was a sorcerer, not merely a wielder of the warp, but an architect of change itself, blessed by Tzinch, with sight beyond sight, knowledge beyond knowledge. My staff channeled the raw stuff of the immaterium, bending reality to my will with gestures and words of power that made the air itself weep crimson tears. I could unmake a man with a thought, transform his flesh into crystallized time, freeze him in a moment of eternal transformation that would never complete, never release him. I was magnificent. The memory rises through the chaos of my dissolving mind like a drowning man's final breath breaking the surface. I remember the day I pledged myself to the architect of fate. I was young then, barely 23 years old, a sanctioned psyker in service to the Imperium, stationed on a forge world whose name I have long since forgotten. I had spent years suppressing my gifts, channeling them through approved methods, following the rigid doctrines of the Telepathica. But the power inside me was a caged star, burning, desperate to be free. The whispers found me in my sleep. They spoke of possibility, of potential, of the 1,000 paths my life could take if only I would stop limiting myself to the narrow road the Imperium had chosen for me. They showed me visions of what I could become, not a tool to be used and discarded, not a weapon to be aimed and fired, but a master of my own destiny, a shaper of reality itself. I said yes. The moment I opened myself to the warp fully, without restraint, without the psychic dampeners and mental fortifications the Imperium had drilled into my consciousness, I felt transcendence. Pure, overwhelming, intoxicating transcendence. The veil between dimensions tore open, and I saw the immaterium in all its terrible glory. The sea of souls, the realm of pure thought and emotion given form, where impossibility was the only law and change was the only constant. Tzeentch himself regarded me, not with eyes, for he has too many eyes and none at all, but with attention that burned like a sun focused through glass. In that moment I understood that I had been seen, chosen, marked for greatness. The god of change and sorcery had looked upon my soul and found it worthy. The gifts came quickly after that. First, small mutations, beautiful ones. My eyes changed color, cycling through spectrums invisible to normal human sight. I could see the threads of fate, the branching possibilities that extended from every choice, every action. My hands developed sensitivity to the warp, letting me feel its currents like a sailor feels the wind. Knowledge flooded my mind, forbidden texts materializing in my memory though I had never read them, secrets of the universe unfolding like flowers blooming in accelerated time. I grew powerful. I fled the Imperium's service, making my way to the Eye of Terror, that great wound in reality where the materium and immaterium bleed into each other. There, on demon worlds where physics itself was negotiable, I honed my craft. I studied under entities that had forgotten they were once human. I learned to speak languages composed entirely of colors, to write equations that reshaped flesh, to read the future in the patterns of spilled blood. I led my warband on raids that carved our names into imperial history. We struck at shrine worlds and hive cities, at forge complexes and orbital stations. Everywhere we went, we brought change. We toppled governments, corrupted entire populations, turned loyal servants of the corpse emperor into screaming devotees of the true gods. I personally burned 11 cathedrals, each one dedicated to the false emperor's worship. I watched them melt, stone flowing like wax, statues of saints transforming into monuments to the ruinous powers. Each victory brought new gifts. My powers expanded. I could summon demons with a gesture, tear open reality, and pull flamers and horrors into the material realm to do my bidding. I wore armor blessed by the warp, shifting in color and design, never the same twice, impossible to predict or counter. My staff became an artifact, its crystal head containing captured moments of transformation, forever frozen, forever changing. I believed I was ascending. Every gift, every mutation, every expansion of my power was another step on the path to apotheosis. I knew what I would become. All who serve chaos faithfully enough, who prove themselves worthy, receive the ultimate reward. They transcend mortality entirely, rising as demon princes, immortal and terrible, eternally bound to their patron god, but freed from the limitations of flesh. That was my destiny. I was certain of it. But there were others in my warband, fellow sorcerers and champions who pursued the same path. I remember Caraxus, who called down warp storms with his mind. I remember Silith, whose mutations were works of art, feathers of iridescent blue growing from her shoulders like an angel's wings. I remember Vorenus, whose third eye could see across vast distances, perceiving battles yet to be fought. One by one, they vanished. We called it receiving the ultimate gift. When a champion disappeared after a particularly glorious victory or a moment of profound devotion, we assumed they had ascended, that Tzeentch had lifted them up to join his court in the crystal labyrinth. We celebrated. We envied them. We redoubled our efforts, desperate to be next, to earn that same recognition. But none of them ever returned. None of them ever sent word from their supposed divinity. They simply ceased to exist in our reality, removed from the material plane as though they had never been. I told myself this was natural. The warp does not work according to mortal understanding. Perhaps they had ascended to such heights that communication with lesser beings was impossible. Perhaps they existed now on frequencies we could not perceive. I did not understand. Not then. Not until I knelt in those ashes, watching my hands split and multiply, hearing my voice become a chorus of wrongness, feeling my God's attention shift from favor to something else entirely. Now, as my spine continues to elongate and my legs bend in directions they were never meant to bend, I understand what happened to Caraxus and Silith and Vorenus. They became what I am becoming, and I realize with crushing certainty that I will never see them again, not because they transcended to unreachable heights, but because they are scattered across demon worlds and warp-touched battlefields, shambling and mindless, their names forgotten even by themselves. The ritual was meant to crown my ascension. I prepared for 18 days and 18 nights, drawing the ninefold sigil across the floor of my sanctum in powdered warpstone and the rendered fat of psychers. Each line had to be perfect, each angle precise to the degree, each symbol spoken aloud in the language of pure change. I fasted. I meditated. I opened my mind fully to the warp, letting its currents flow through me without resistance, preparing myself to become a conduit for power that would elevate me beyond anything I had achieved before. I was going to bind a lord of change, not a lesser demon, not one of the cackling horrors or mindless flamers I had summoned countless times before. I wanted one of Tzeentch's greatest servants, a creature of pure intellect and sorcery, a being that had plotted the downfall of empires before humanity learned to make fire. If I could bind such an entity to my will, if I could command it and prove my mastery over even the mightiest of my God's creations, surely that would demonstrate my worthiness. Surely Tzeentch would see that I was ready, that I deserved the final gift, the transformation into something eternal and magnificent. My warband gathered to witness. 43 souls stood in a circle around my ritual space, their eyes reflecting the witch light that already danced across the sigils. They chanted in unison, their voices creating harmonics that resonated with the warp itself. I could feel reality growing thin, the barrier between dimensions wearing away like paper held too close to flame. I spoke the demon's true name, all 999 syllables of it, each one a key that turned a lock in the fabric of existence. My throat bled by the 300th syllable. By the 600th, I was speaking in frequencies that shattered the glass in my sanctum's windows. By the final syllable, I was screaming words that had weight and texture, that left cuts in the air where they passed. The daemon came. It manifested not gradually, but instantly, erupting into reality with such force that 3 of my warband were torn apart by the sheer pressure of its arrival. The Lord of Change towered above me, its form shifting constantly, feathers becoming flames, becoming eyes, becoming mouths, becoming feathers again in an endless cycle. Its wings spanned the width of my sanctum, each feather inscribed with futures that would never come to pass. It had faces within faces, and each one regarded me with expressions I could not name. The demon spoke, and its voice was the sound of civilizations crumbling, of stars collapsing, of time running backward and forward simultaneously. It asked me why I dared summon it. What made me believe I had the right to bind a being that had served the architect of fate since before my species crawled out of terror's oceans? What made me think I was worthy? I should have answered with absolute confidence. I should have proclaimed my devotion, my power, my unwavering faith in Tzeentch and the path of eternal change. I should have demonstrated the certainty that had carried me through 2 centuries of service. Instead, I hesitated. For just one moment, looking up at that impossible being, feeling the weight of its presence crushing down on me, I doubted. Not my power, not my devotion, but something deeper, something I had buried beneath years of pride and ambition. I doubted whether this was what I truly wanted, whether the path I had chosen would lead where I believed it would lead, whether ascension would be glory or something else entirely. It was only a moment, a single heartbeat of uncertainty. But in the warp, in the presence of a greater daemon, in the middle of a ritual designed to demonstrate absolute mastery, that moment was everything. The demon laughed. It was not amused, it was contemptuous. And through the daemon, Tzeentch himself turned his attention toward me. I had felt my god's gaze before, that burning focus that had marked me as chosen, that had filled me with purpose and power. This was different. This was not the warm approval of a patron recognizing a faithful servant. This was something cold and clinical, the regard of an experimenter who had just noticed an interesting flaw in his subject. The air thickened, not metaphorically, actually thickened, becoming viscous, resistant, like trying to breathe honey. Reality began to bend around me, the angles of my sanctum's walls shifting in ways that hurt to perceive. The 9-fold sigil on the floor began to glow, but the light was wrong, pulsing in rhythms that made my heart stutter and skip. I tried to speak, to explain, to plead, but my voice came out in fragments, syllables that fell from my mouth like broken glass. Around me, my warband stepped back, all 40 of them still living, moving in unison, creating distance between themselves and what was happening to me. Their faces showed fear, but beneath the fear, I saw something worse. Recognition. They had seen this before. They knew what came next. I reached out toward them, desperate, begging without words for someone to help me, to intervene, to do anything. But they continued backing away, their eyes avoiding mine, their expressions carefully neutral. To help me would be to question the god's judgment. To question the god's judgment would be to invite the same fate. The Lord of Change spread its wings, and I understood with perfect, horrible clarity that it had never been in danger of being bound. The ritual had been a test, and I had failed it. Not because my technique was flawed or my power insufficient, but because I had hesitated. Because in that crucial moment, I had not embraced change with absolute faith. I had questioned, I had doubted, and Tzeentch, the architect of fate, the changer of ways, does not tolerate servants who fear change itself. The demon spoke again, and this time its words bypassed my ears entirely, inscribing themselves directly onto my consciousness. It said that my God had decided I required a deeper understanding of transformation, that I would receive a gift more profound than I had imagined, that I would experience change in ways I had never conceived. I tried to scream that I understood, that I would do better, that I was still faithful, still devoted, still worthy. but the words would not come. My throat was already changing, the vocal cords splitting and multiplying, preparing for the chorus of voices I would soon possess. The verdict had been rendered before I even completed the ritual. Perhaps before I even began it. Perhaps the moment I decided to summon the demon. My God had already chosen this fate for me. Already set in motion the transformation that would unmake everything I was. The Lord of Change vanished, its purpose fulfilled, leaving me alone with my warband and the weight of divine disappointment pressing down like atmosphere, like gravity, like the entire universe collapsing inward toward a single point. My God was no longer lifting me up. My God was remaking me. The first change was so subtle I almost missed it. 3 hours after the Lord of Change vanished, after my warband had dispersed in uncomfortable silence, after I had remained kneeling in my sanctum surrounded by the failed ritual's remnants, I felt a tingling beneath the skin of my left hand. It was gentle, almost pleasant, like the sensation of blood returning to a limb that had fallen asleep. I flexed my fingers, studying them in the dim witch light, and saw nothing unusual. The skin appeared normal. The bones moved as they should. I convinced myself it was simply residual energy from the ritual, psychic feedback that would fade in time. By the next morning, the tingling had spread to my forearm. I tried to ignore it, to lose myself in meditation and study as I had done countless times before when recovering from particularly demanding sorcery. But focus would not come. My mind kept drifting, returning again and again to the sensation crawling beneath my skin, to the weight of my God's attention that still lingered like pressure before a storm. The hunger arrived on the second day. Not hunger for food, though I had not eaten since beginning the ritual fast. This was something different, something I had no words for. A craving that existed in my chest, my throat, my stomach, demanding satisfaction but offering no clue as to what might satisfy it. I tried eating, I tried drinking, I tried meditation and prayer and the consumption of warp dust. Nothing helped. The hunger remained, growing stronger, becoming an ache that radiated through my entire body. Colors began to intensify on the third day. The blues and purples of my sanctum's walls became painfully bright, searing my vision with their vibrancy. I could see spectrums I had not perceived before, ultraviolet and infrared bleeding into the visible light, creating halos and auras around every object. When I looked at my hands, I saw not just flesh, but the layers beneath, the muscles and blood vessels and bone, all visible simultaneously, overlapping in translucent sheets. Sounds became sharper. I could hear my own heartbeats, both of them slightly out of sync. I could hear the blood rushing through my veins, the grinding of cartilage in my joints, the whisper of air moving through my lungs. From elsewhere in our encampment, I heard conversations in perfect clarity, though the speakers were 300 paces away. Every noise had texture, weight, color. I told myself this was temporary, a test of my faith, nothing more. Tzeentch was the god of change, and change was never comfortable. These sensations would pass. I simply needed to endure them, to prove my devotion through perseverance. I would emerge stronger, more worthy, ready to attempt the ritual again with proper humility and absolute certainty. My armor stopped fitting properly on the 5th day, not because it was damaged. The ceramite remained intact, the blessed plates showing no sign of wear. But when I donned it, preparing for the evening's rituals, the chest piece sat wrong against my torso, too tight in some places, too loose in others, as though my body had subtly shifted in ways I could not see. I adjusted the straps, recalibrated the seals, but nothing felt right. The armor that had been perfectly fitted to my form for 60 years now pressed against me like a stranger's clothes. I looked down at my chest, and saw nothing unusual. No swelling, no deformity. Yet beneath the skin, I felt movement. Not the movement of breathing or the beating of hearts, but something else. Something rearranging itself, sliding and shifting, finding new configurations. On the 7th day, I discovered the eye. It was on my left palm, where no eye should be. A small thing, barely larger than a fingernail, but unmistakably an eye. It blinked when I examined it, the lid opening and closing independently of my conscious control. When I flexed my hand, the eye moved with the skin, looking in different directions, seeing things I did not want to see. I wrapped my hand immediately, binding it in cloth thick enough to conceal the mutation. When my warband asked about the bandage, I told them I had burned myself during an experiment. They accepted this without question. Injuries were common among those who worked with the warp's raw power, but the changes did not stop. My fingers began to fuse on the 9th day. The flesh between my index and middle finger grew together, merging so gradually I did not notice until they had become partially joined. I tried to separate them, pulling them apart, but the skin stretched without tearing. By evening, they had fused completely. By the following morning, they had split again, but now I had 7 fingers on that hand instead of 5, each one slightly wrong, slightly too long or too short, the joints in unexpected places. I stopped attending the warband's gatherings. I told them I was deep in research, pursuing knowledge that required isolation and absolute focus. This was not entirely a lie. I was indeed researching, desperately searching through every text and scroll I possessed, looking for any mention of these symptoms, any ritual or cure that might reverse what was happening. I found nothing helpful. Only vague references to gifts that could not be refused, to transformations that served the greater plans of the gods. My thoughts began to fracture on the 14th day. I would be reading a text, following a complex argument about the nature of the warp, when suddenly I would realize I had lost my place. Not just lost my place on the page, but lost entire minutes of time. The scroll would have advanced 3 pages, and I would have no memory of reading them, no understanding of how my hands had moved the parchment. Words began to escape me. Simple words, ones I had used 10,000 times. I would reach for them in my mind, and they would not be there. I would know the concept I wanted to express, feel it clearly in my thoughts, but the word itself had vanished like smoke. I would spend minutes searching my vocabulary, growing increasingly frustrated, only to have the word suddenly reappear as though it had never been gone. Time became unreliable. I would sit down to study, and what felt like an hour would be 4. Or I would work through what seemed like an entire evening, only to check the chronometer and find that 7 minutes had passed. The psychological horror was worse than the physical mutations. My body changing was terrible, but my mind fragmenting was unbearable. I was losing pieces of myself, watching my consciousness develop gaps and blank spaces. It felt like standing on ice that cracked beneath every thought, never knowing which step would plunge me through into the dark water below. I tried to hide it all. The wrapped hands concealed the eye. Long robes covered the places where my body no longer matched my armor. Silence disguised the fact that I was forgetting how to form coherent sentences. But I could not hide from myself what I was beginning to understand. This was not a test. This was not temporary. This was the gift my God had decided I deserved, and it had only just begun. By the 21st day, concealment became impossible. My left arm split down the middle during the morning ritual prayers. I felt the bone divide first, a sensation like lightning traveling through marrow, and then the flesh followed. The skin tore with a wet sound, and where there had been 1 arm, there were now 2, both emerging from the same shoulder joint, both fully formed and functional. They moved independently, each one responding to different impulses, reaching in opposite directions as though my consciousness had fractured to control them separately. I stared at my new limbs, watching them flex and curl, and something inside me finally broke. Not my mind, not yet, but the fragile hope I had been clinging to. The hope that this would stop. The hope that I could somehow endure and return to what I was. My warband found me that afternoon. I had not emerged from my sanctum in days, and they came to investigate, concerned or perhaps simply curious. When they entered, they found me sitting on the floor, my robes torn open, my body a catalogue of changes I could no longer hide. 3 arms now. The right leg had developed a second knee, bending backward, giving me a gait that was no longer remotely human. My chest had split partially, revealing not organs but something else, a pulsing mass of tissue that glowed with its own light. And my face had begun to slide, the features moving across my skull like continents drifting on a planet's surface. They looked at me with expressions I had never seen directed toward me before. Not respect, not fear of my power, but horror, revulsion, pity. One of them, Malthus, who had served in my warband for 40 years, took a step toward me. His hand reached out, perhaps to offer comfort, perhaps simply to confirm I was real. But before he could touch me, my mouth opened and sounds emerged that were not words, a cacophony of voices, some human, some not, some that existed in frequencies that shattered 2 of the candles burning nearby. I tried to tell him I was still myself, still their leader, still worthy of following. But what came out was a chorus of screaming and laughter and syllables that belonged to no language spoken by mortal tongues. They fled. All of them. 40 souls who had sworn oaths to follow me into any darkness, who had raided alongside me for decades, who had called me master and champion and prophet. They fled from my sanctum, and I heard them gathering their possessions, heard the sounds of hasty departure, heard the engines of our transports roaring to life. Within 3 hours, the encampment was empty except for me. I should have felt abandoned, betrayed. But instead, I felt relief. I did not want them to see what I was becoming. I did not want to watch their faces as I transformed further into something that could no longer command, could no longer inspire, could no longer even communicate. I fled in the opposite direction, moving deeper into the demon world's twisted landscape. My new leg made running difficult, but I managed a shambling gait that covered ground. The sky above churned with colors that hurt to perceive. The ground beneath my feet was not quite solid, not quite liquid, existing in states between states. Mountains in the distance grew and shrank, their peaks reaching toward the screaming heavens, and then collapsing into valleys. This was the eye of terror, where reality itself was negotiable, where the warp and the materium bled into each other until neither could be distinguished. I had walked these lands for decades, had found them beautiful in their terrible way. Now they felt like a mirror, reflecting what I was becoming, showing me the truth of transformation, stripped of all poetry and glory. I walked for days or weeks or hours. Time had no meaning here. I encountered things that had once been mortal, warped and changed by proximity to pure chaos. Some fled from me. Others tried to attack. I defended myself instinctively, and my changing body responded in ways I did not control, sprouting claws, secreting acids, emitting sounds that drove attackers mad. On the 3rd day, or perhaps the 30th, I found others like me. They shambled through a canyon of crystallized time, creatures that defied description, that hurt to look at because they changed too rapidly for eyes to follow. Masses of flesh and bone and other substances that had no names, configurations that violated every principle of biology and physics. Some had too many limbs, some had none. Some were mostly mouths. Some were mostly eyes. All of them mewled and gibbered and moved with the purposeless hunger of things that had forgotten what purpose was. Chaos spawn. That was the word I had heard before, spoken in hushed tones, used to describe the things that champions became when they failed their gods. I had never truly understood what the word meant. Now I walked among them, and I understood with perfect, crushing clarity. One of them turned toward me, drawn by my movement or my scent or some sense I could not name. It had been large once, perhaps a mighty warrior. Now it was a thing of tentacles and beaks and eyes clustered in grotesque configurations. It shambled closer, and I saw something in the pattern of its mutations, some echo of a form I recognized. The tentacles. They were not random. They were positioned where arms should be, where a champion's arms had once been when he raised his bolter and fought beside me on 17 different worlds. Caraxus, my brother, my fellow sorcerer, the champion who had vanished 3 years ago after a particularly glorious victory, who we had believed ascended to greatness. He did not recognize me. His clustered eyes looked through me without comprehension, without memory, without any spark of the brilliant mind that had once plotted schemes spanning centuries. He was hunger and mutation, and nothing else. Whatever he had been was gone, consumed by the very change he had once embraced. I tried to speak his name, but my voice had fractured completely now. Sometimes human syllables emerged. Sometimes a chorus of voices spoke in harmony or discord. Sometimes sounds that were not sounds at all, that existed as pressure waves or emotional frequencies or colors made audible. I tried to pray. For the first time since the ritual failed, I opened my mind fully to the warp and reached out toward Tzeentch, toward the god I had served for 2 centuries, toward the patron who had once filled me with purpose and power. I received nothing but static, not silence, which would have been merciful, but static, the white noise of a connection that exists but carries no meaning, and beneath the static, barely audible laughter. Not my god's laughter, something smaller, the laughter of lesser demons, of the minor entities that feed on suffering and failure. My god was not listening. He had moved on to other champions, other experiments, other toys to break and remake. I was no longer worthy of attention, neither blessed enough to ascend nor important enough to personally destroy. I was simply another spawn, another failed servant wandering the wastelands, changing until change itself lost all meaning. Bones erupted from my back, forming structures that might have been wings, but lacked the configuration to ever fly. They retracted slowly, leaving puckered scars that opened and closed like mouths, gasping at air with no lungs behind them. I was being unmade. But I remained aware enough to witness every moment of it. The demon found me on the 57th day, or perhaps I found it, or perhaps there was no distinction in this place where causality bent back on itself like a serpent consuming its tail. It materialized from the air itself, a horror of Tzeentch, one of the cackling lesser demons that served as messengers and observers for the changer of ways. Its form shifted between configurations, sometimes bipedal, sometimes not, always wrong in ways that made geometry weep. It did not attack. It simply regarded me with eyes that multiplied and divided across its constantly reforming flesh. Then it laughed. Not the malicious laughter of an enemy celebrating victory, not the cruel laughter of one who takes pleasure in suffering. This was something worse. This was the laughter of someone who found genuine amusement in a cosmic joke, who saw something so absurdly funny that the laughter was involuntary and pure. I tried to speak, to demand answers, to assert some vestige of the authority I had once commanded. My multiple mouths produced sounds that might have been words in some reality, but not in this one. The demon understood anyway. It always understood. That was its purpose. It spoke in a voice that tasted of copper and sounded like breaking glass. It told me I was confused, that I had misunderstood everything, that my suffering was rooted in a fundamental error of perspective, and if I could simply adjust my thinking, I would see the beauty of what had been done to me. I did not want to hear this. I tried to turn away, to shamble back into the wastelands, but my body had developed new legs during the night, and they moved in directions I had not yet learned to control. I stumbled, falling onto appendages that were neither arms nor legs, but something between. The demon circled me, still laughing, still shifting, its form never settling long enough to be properly perceived. It explained that I believed I was being punished, that I thought my transformation into a spawn was divine retribution for my failure, for my moment of hesitation, for my doubt. It said this was mortal thinking, limited thinking, the kind of small perspective that kept lesser beings trapped in cycles of cause and effect. The truth, it said, was that I had been given a gift. I tried to reject this, to scream that this was no gift but a curse, a horror, a fate worse than death. But the demon continued, its words bypassing my fractured consciousness and inscribing themselves directly onto whatever remained of my understanding. In the eyes of chaos, it explained, mortal existence was a prison. Mortals clung desperately to identity, to purpose, to the illusion of a continuous self. They spent their entire lives trying to maintain coherent narratives about who they were, what they wanted, where they were going. They feared change because change threatened the fragile story they told themselves about their own significance. Spawn, the demon said with something almost resembling reverence, transcended all of that. A spawn was pure potential, pure mutation, pure chaos given flesh, released from the burden of identity, freed from the tyranny of purpose, liberated from the need to maintain any coherent form or thought or will. A spawn existed in a state of perpetual transformation, experiencing change not as loss, but as fundamental nature. They were not broken. They were perfected in their imperfection, completed in their incompleteness. The gods did not hate their spawn, the demon continued. Hatred implied investment, attention, emotion. The gods were simply indifferent. A spawn was what remained when a mortal soul proved incapable of ascending to daemonhood, but still carried enough warp-touched essence to be interesting. Too weak to become immortal. Too corrupted to simply die. The perfect middle ground between transcendence and oblivion. I was not being punished for my failure, the demon explained. I was being utilized. My flesh would continue to change, to mutate, to serve as a canvas upon which the warp could paint infinite variations. I would wander these lands forever, or something like forever, my form shifting in ways that might eventually produce something interesting enough to draw divine attention again. Or might not. The indifference was the point. Everything I had believed about my path inverted in that moment. I had thought I was chosen, special, marked for greatness. I had believed that my service to Tzeentch was a partnership, that I was working toward a shared goal, that my ascension was inevitable if I simply proved worthy enough. But there had never been a partnership. There had never been any real possibility of ascension. Not for me, not for Caraxus, or Silith, or Varinus, or any of the others who had vanished before me. We had always been raw material, components in experiments that might succeed or fail without consequence. Our ambitions, our pride, our certainty that we were special, all of it had been illusions we created to make servitude feel like purpose. The demon asked if I understood now, if I saw the beauty of it, if I could appreciate the elegant simplicity of being freed from the burden of significance. I understood, and the understanding broke something in me that all the physical transformations had not managed to break. My resistance stopped, not because I accepted my fate, not because I found peace or wisdom or any kind of reconciliation, but because I finally, truly comprehended that resistance had always been meaningless. There was nothing to resist, no enemy to fight, no injustice to rail against, just the simple, crushing weight of cosmic indifference, the realization that I had never mattered enough to punish, had never been important enough to hate. I was a spawn. I had always been becoming a spawn. From the moment I said yes to the whispers, from the moment I opened myself fully to the warp, from perhaps even before I was born, this had been the inevitable conclusion. Not because I was special, but because I was not. The daemon laughed one final time and dissolved back into the air, its purpose fulfilled, leaving me alone with my new understanding. My body continued changing. Flesh rippled and reformed. New limbs sprouted and retracted. Mouths opened in places that had been solid moments before. But I no longer tried to control it, no longer attempted to maintain any sense of form or coherence. What was the point? What had there ever been a point? I was raw material, and raw material did not resist being shaped. The surrender accelerated everything. Once I stopped trying to hold my form, once I stopped attempting to maintain coherence, the changes came faster. Not crueler, not more painful, but faster, as though my resistance had been the only thing slowing the inevitable. Within hours, or what felt like hours, I had lost count of my limbs. Within days, or what felt like days, I had lost the ability to count. My thoughts began to come in fragments, separated by spaces I could not account for. I would be thinking about something, some memory, or plan, or observation, and then there would be nothing. And then I would find myself thinking about something completely different with no understanding of how I had arrived there. The connection between thoughts dissolved, leaving only isolated islands of consciousness floating in an ocean of blank. I tried to hold on to memories, specific ones, important ones, things that defined who I had been. There was a face, someone I had known, before chaos, before the warband, before everything. A woman, I think, or perhaps a man, or perhaps something else entirely. The features kept shifting in my recollection. Nose becoming eyes, becoming mouth, becoming nothing. I knew this person had been important. I knew their presence in my life had meant something. But I could not remember why. Could not recall conversations or moments or even their name. Just the ghost of a face that changed every time I tried to focus on it. There was a battle. One of my victories. One that had meant something. That had proven my worth to my God. I remembered fire. I remembered screaming. I remembered the sensation of power flowing through me, of reality bending to my will. But I could not remember where the battle had taken place, or who I had fought or what I had gained from winning. Just fire and screaming, and the echo of significance that no longer had context. There was my name. My name. I had spoken it once, tried to anchor myself to it, tried to prove I still existed. Now I could not remember what it was. I knew I had possessed one. I knew it had been important, had carried weight, had defined me across decades or centuries. But the syllables were gone, dissolved like sugar in water, leaving only the faint taste of something that used to be sweet. My body had become a catalogue of impossibilities. Wings sprouted from my shoulders, my hips, my skull. Beautiful feathered things in colors that existed between purple and sound. But they could not lift me. They beat uselessly at the air, creating patterns that meant nothing, achieving nothing, serving no purpose except to exist and change, and exist differently. Eyes opened across my flesh, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds. They saw in spectrums that had no names. Ultraviolet merged with memory. Infrared overlapped with emotion. Some eyes looked backward through time. Some looked sideways into parallel possibilities. Some simply looked at nothing, perceiving wavelengths that carried no information, that existed in spaces between spaces. Mouths formed and spoke. Not words, not exactly. Languages that had never been spoken by mortal vocal cords, that required harmonics impossible for human throats, that existed as vibrations in dimensions perpendicular to sound. I did not know what I was saying. I did not know if I was saying anything at all, or simply producing noise that resembled meaning without containing it. Time stopped working, or I stopped working with time, or the distinction between the two concepts eroded until neither made sense. I walked through the demon world's landscape. Was I walking? Was I crawling? Was I doing something that lacked a name? My new legs, however many there were, moved in sequences I did not consciously control. Sometimes I traveled forward. Sometimes I moved in directions that were not forward or backward or sideways, but something else entirely, crossing space by folding through angles that should not exist. I might have been wandering for days, for centuries, for heartbeats. The sky above changed colors, but I could not tell if this meant time was passing or if the sky was simply performing its nature, shifting hues, because that was what skies did in places where reality negotiated with impossibility. Pain and pleasure merged. Or perhaps they had always been the same thing, and I was only now understanding this. Flesh tore and regrew, and the sensation was agony and ecstasy simultaneously, indistinguishable, unified into a single overwhelming experience that I lacked words to describe, because words required categories, and categories required distinctions, and distinctions required a mind that could tell one thing from another. Occasionally, something surfaced. A moment of clarity. Brief. Agonizing, like breaking through water's surface, gasping for air, seeing sky and sun before being pulled back under. I remembered I had been someone. I did not remember who. I remembered I had wanted something. I did not remember what. I remembered there was a reason to care about any of this. I did not remember why. These moments became rarer, came less frequently, or perhaps they came just as often, but I lost the ability to recognize them as different from the chaos that surrounded them. Each time one arrived, I tried to hold it, to use it as an anchor, to climb back toward whatever I had been, but they slipped away. Always. Inevitably. Water through fingers that were no longer fingers. I wanted to scream. I think I wanted to scream. But screaming required understanding that something was wrong, that current state was worse than previous state, that I had lost something worth screaming about. And those categories, those comparisons, those frameworks of meaning were dissolving faster than I could cling to them. I was watching my own mind dissolve. But watching required a watcher and a watched thing, and the distinction between the two was blurring. I was not watching my mind dissolve. I was the dissolution itself, experiencing itself, observing itself, but lacking the structure to understand what observation meant. Words lost meaning. Not slowly, suddenly. I would think a word and it would be empty, just sound without content, just shape without substance. I became meaningless. Think became meaningless. Become became meaningless. Until I was left with nothing but sensation without framework, experience without experiencer, consciousness without anything to be conscious of. Except I was still here, still aware, still experiencing. That was the worst part. If there was a worst part. If worst meant anything, if meaning meant anything, if anything meant if I exist. That is all I can say with certainty. I exist, not as I existed before, not as anything that has a name, but existence continues, awareness continues. Something that could be called consciousness persists in this assemblage of flesh and mutation that shambles through landscapes I no longer recognize. I do not remember being human, but I remember that I once remembered. The distinction is important, though I cannot articulate why. There was a before. I cannot access it, cannot recall its details or texture or meaning, but the ghost of it lingers. The negative space where memory used to be, the shape of absence. I exist in an eternal present. There is no past, because past requires memory and sequence and narrative. There is no future, because future requires anticipation and planning and desire. There is only now, endless, unchanging now, even as my form changes constantly, even as I move through space and encounter things and experience sensations. Hungers drive me. I do not know what I hunger for. The cravings have no names, no objects, no possibility of satisfaction. I hunger, and so I move. I move, and so I encounter. I encounter, and so I hunger. The cycle repeats without beginning or end. Sometimes other beings cross my path. Cultists, draped in robes that bear symbols I recognize without understanding. They see me and recoil. Sometimes they flee. Sometimes they attack with weapons that tear through my flesh, creating wounds that seal and heal and transform even as they open. Sometimes they try to worship me, prostrating themselves before what they believe is a blessed servant of their God. I do not know what response they expect. My multiple mouths produce sounds. My various appendages gesture. They interpret meaning in my movements that I do not intend because I no longer possess intention. Demons pass through the spaces I occupy. Lesser entities of the warp, manifestations of chaos in forms more coherent than mine. They regard me with curiosity or contempt or indifference. Sometimes they speak, their voices carrying words I once understood. Now the sounds wash over me like water, leaving no impression, conveying nothing. We are not the same, the demons and I. They are purpose-given form. I am form given nothing. Once, Space Marines found me. Power armor the color of darkness. Weapons that spoke thunder. They appeared from the warped landscape, a hunting party seeking chaos forces to destroy. I do not know what chapter they served. I do not know why they were here. I only know they saw me, and one of them spoke. "Spawn," he said, the word distorted by his helmet's Vox grill. Not a question. A statement. A categorization. Pitiable thing. They raised their weapons. Bolters that fired mass-reactive shells, explosives that detonated inside flesh. The rounds tore through my body, each impact creating craters of destroyed tissue, each explosion pulverizing bone and organ and muscle. I did not die. The wounds regenerated. Not healed, because healing implies returning to a proper state, and I no longer possessed a proper state. But the flesh regrew, flowing like water into new configurations, sometimes matching what had been there before, sometimes creating entirely new structures. An arm destroyed became two smaller arms. A head partially obliterated sprouted additional faces. The Space Marines fired again, pouring rounds into my mass until their ammunition ran low. I still did not die. One of them approached, drawing a combat blade, perhaps thinking to finish me with melee weapons. But another stopped him, placing an armored hand on his shoulder. "Leave it," the second Marine said. "Ammunition is precious. This thing is beneath our notice." They left. I remained, regenerating, reforming, continuing to exist because the warp sustained me. because spawn do not die easily, because my transformation had made me something that persisted beyond all reason or mercy. In that moment, watching them disappear into the twisted landscape, something surfaced. One of those rare fragments of clarity, sharp and terrible and brief. I understood what I had become. I was not dead. The dead had peace. The dead had ending. The dead stopped experiencing. I was not alive. The living had purpose. The living had growth and change that meant something. The living could hope. I was neither. I was a wound in reality that writhes and changes, but never heals and never closes. An error that reality cannot correct. A mistake that existence cannot erase. I was the space between states, trapped in perpetual transformation that went nowhere, meant nothing, achieved nothing. Death would be mercy, but mercy was not granted to spawn. We persisted. We regenerated, we continued. The warp flowed through us, sustaining us, preventing us from achieving the oblivion that would have been blessing. We were eternal witnesses to our own degradation, conscious just enough to suffer, aware just enough to understand what we had lost, but lacking the faculties to even properly grieve. This was the cruelty of the gift. Not the transformation itself, but the persistence, the inability to end, the forced continuation of awareness long past the point where awareness had any purpose or meaning. I tried to pray, not with words because words were gone, not with thoughts because coherent thoughts were beyond me, but with some fundamental impulse, some core piece of whatever I was, reaching out toward the God who had made me, toward Tzeentch who had shaped me into this. Nothing returned, not even static, not even laughter, just void, absolute indifference. The moment of clarity faded. The understanding dissolved back into the chaos of non-thought and fragmented sensation. But something remained. Not memory of the understanding, but the weight of it. The knowledge that I had briefly understood something terrible, even if I could no longer remember what. I shambled forward, or what passed for forward in this place. My countless appendages moved in their discordant rhythms. My many eyes saw spectrums without meaning. My numerous mouths spoke languages never meant for mortal comprehension. And inside, buried deep beneath layers of mutation and madness, something still watched, something still experienced, something still suffered. Forever. The symbol appeared without warning, carved into stone that might have been a wall or a cliff, or simply a fragment of reality that had solidified long enough to hold shape. 9 angles. Crystalline. Perfect. The mark of Tzeentch. The symbol I had worn on my armor, had painted on my standards, had burned into the flesh of enemies and allies alike. The sign of the changer of ways, the architect of fate, the God I had served for lifetimes that felt like moments, and moments that felt like lifetimes. Seeing it triggered something. Not memory exactly, but recognition. A resonance deep in whatever core still persisted beneath the layers of mutation and chaos. I stopped moving. All my limbs, however many there were, froze in their disparate rhythms. All my eyes, however many had grown, focused on those 9 angles. And in that focus, clarity returned. One final time. One last moment of coherence before the end. I understood that I had a choice. Not escape. There was no escape. The transformation was irreversible. The changes permanent. The fate sealed. I would be spawn until something finally destroyed me, or until the universe itself collapsed into entropy. That was not negotiable, but I could choose how to experience it. I could continue as I had been, clinging to these fragments of selfhood, these rare moments where something surfaced that remembered remembering, where consciousness briefly cohered enough to understand what had been lost. Each moment a torture of almost memory, almost identity, almost humanity. Each clarity followed inevitably by dissolution, by the horror of watching myself fragment again, by the grief of losing what I had just regained. This was suffering, pure suffering, the eternal torment of awareness that persisted just long enough to comprehend its own meaninglessness before dissolving back into chaos. Or I could let go, not die. Death was not available to me. But I could stop clinging, stop trying to hold these fragments together, stop reaching for memories that no longer existed, stop attempting to maintain any vestige of the identity that had once defined me. I could release my grip and allow the dissolution to complete itself, to flow through me without resistance, to become what I was becoming without the anchor of what I had been. This would not be peace. It would not be transcendence or wisdom or any kind of victory. It would be worse than death because death was ending, and this would be endless. But it would be the end of suffering because suffering required a self to suffer, and I could choose to release that self completely. I stood before the symbol. My multiple hearts beat in rhythms that had no synchronization. My countless appendages trembled with the weight of this final decision. Let go, or hold on. Eternal torture of almost being, or eternal existence of pure becoming. I chose. I released. My grip on my name loosened first. That syllable, that sound, that anchor I had clung to since the beginning. I felt it slipping away like sand through fingers, and I did not try to catch it. I let it fall, let it dissolve, let it become nothing but vibration without meaning. My memories followed, not erased but released. The faces, the battles, the victories and failures and moments that had seemed so important. I opened my hands and let them go, watched them drift away like ash on wind, did not try to hold them, did not try to preserve them. My human framework dissolved. The categories, the distinctions, self and other, past and future, meaning and meaninglessness, all the structures that had let me navigate existence as something coherent. I felt them crumble and did not try to rebuild them. The narrative voice began to fragment. Words lost their edges. Sentences became impressions, became sensations, became colors, became sounds, became nothing, became everything, became I no longer. The distinction between I and not I. Gone. Dissolved. Irrelevant. Flesh flows. Changes. Multiple forms overlapping. No preferred state. All states simultaneous. Potential and actual merged into. Eyes seeing without seeing without. Mouths speaking without speaking without. Limbs moving without moving without. Time sideways. Space folded. Experience without experiencer. Consciousness without conscious. The symbol. 9 angles. Still there. Or always there. Or never there. The distinction. Something surfaces. One last. One final. A word. A name. My name. The sound that. I try to speak it. To hold it. One more time. Just once. Before. The mouths open. All of them. Sound emerges. Multiple throats. Multiple frequencies. Harmonics that. The word forms. Almost. Nearly. The syllables. But they mean. Nothing. Just sound, just vibration, just the last human thought. The final. I remember my name. I remember I. Gone. Dissolved. Released. Pure mutation. Pure chaos. Pure existence without. No center. No self. No. Only change. Only transformation. Only. Flesh rippling, light folding sound, tasting color. Hearing time sideways, space inside hunger. Without object awareness. Without subject experience. Without experiencer being. Without being becoming. Without destination. Change without purpose. Mutation without meaning. Existence without. Something still. Something still. Something. But not I. Not anymore. Not ever. The symbol fades, or I fade, or the distinction between symbol and I and fading. All gone. All released. All. It exists. Not as it existed before. Not as anything that could be called by name or defined by purpose or understood through categories. But existence continues. In the wastelands of daemon worlds, in the twisted spaces of the Eye of Terror, in the forgotten corners of reality where the warp bleeds through, it shambles and changes and persists. The thing that was once a champion, once a sorcerer, once a servant of Tzeentch marked for greatness and glory, once a being with a name. Now it is simply spawn, one among countless thousands scattered across the galaxy, each one a testament to failure or success, depending on which perspective one adopts. Each one a former champion who reached too far or not far enough, who pleased their god, or displeased their god, or simply became boring to their god. The distinction matters less than mortals believe. It shambles through crystallized time, through landscapes where geometry contradicts itself, through spaces between spaces. Its flesh ripples with constant change. Limbs emerge and retract. Eyes open and close. Mouths form and speak in languages that have no speakers and no listeners. The transformation never stops, never completes, never achieves any final form, because finality is the opposite of what spawn are. To observe it from outside is to see a pitiable thing, a monster, an abomination, something to be destroyed if convenient, ignored if not. Other servants of chaos pass by and do not recognize what it was, who it was, what legends it might have carved before transformation unmade it. Demons regard it with indifference. Cultists either flee or worship without understanding. Space Marines gun it down and watch it regenerate and move on to more worthy targets. It does not suffer. Suffering requires a self to suffer, and the self is gone, released, dissolved into the great churning sea of chaos, until nothing remains but meat that changes and changes and changes. But somewhere, impossibly deep, beneath layers of mutation and madness that have no bottom, something still exists. Not consciousness. Consciousness implies awareness organized into coherent thought. Not identity. Identity implies continuity and narrative and a story one tells oneself about who one is. But something. A ghost of consciousness. An echo of awareness. The faintest impression of something that was once able to think, I am, even though it can no longer think anything at all. It does not remember being human. It does not remember its name or its victories or the moment it said yes to the whispers. It does not remember the ritual that failed or the demon that laughed or the symbol that triggered its final choice. But it remembers that it once remembered. The distinction is unbearably important and completely meaningless simultaneously. Time passes, or does not pass. The spawn continues existing because the warp sustains it, because its flesh regenerates from wounds that should be fatal, because there is no mechanism for it to stop. Years might elapse, centuries, millennia. The spawn has no framework for measuring duration, no sense of before and after, no understanding that existence is stretching into forever. It encounters things, moves through spaces, experiences sensations that have no names, hungers for objects that do not exist, changes in patterns that follow no logic, and somewhere impossibly deep, that ghost thing, that echo thing, that remnant thing, continues experiencing it all. This is the true cruelty, not the transformation itself, not the loss of form or mind or purpose, but the persistence of something just aware enough to register existence without being aware enough to understand it or escape it, or even properly suffer from it. The spawn is beyond suffering, but it is not beyond experience, and experience without the mercy of unconsciousness, without the release of death, without even the dignity of true oblivion, is worse than any torture mortals can conceive. Somewhere in the Materium, on worlds still loyal to the Imperium, on Forge planets and Hive cities and Shrine worlds, young Psykers feel the whispers beginning. They hear promises of power and transcendence. They see visions of what they could become if only they would stop limiting themselves. They believe they are special. They believe they are chosen. They believe transformation means ascension. They do not know about the spawn. Or if they know, they believe it will not happen to them. They are too strong, too faithful, too worthy. The fate that befell others is not a fate they need to fear. They are different. They are better. They are not. The spawn that once had a name shambles through another endless day or century. Its multiple limbs move in their discordant rhythms. Its numerous eyes see spectrums without meaning. Its countless mouths produce sounds that might be screams or prayers, or simply the mechanical noise of air passing through throats that no longer serve any purpose. It tries to remember its name. Not consciously. Consciousness is gone. But some deep impulse, some fragment of programming that survived every transformation, some final ghost of what it was, attempts one more time to speak the syllable that once defined it. The mouths open. All of them. Sound emerges from multiple throats, echoing in frequencies that shatter the air. The sound is nothing, means nothing, is nothing but noise without content, vibration without message, utterance without speaker or listener or meaning. Just sound. Just. And yet somewhere, impossibly deep, something registers that sound was made. Something notes that mouths opened and air moved and vibrations occurred. Something experiences the moment even though there is no longer a something to do the experiencing. The ghost watches. The echo observes. The remnant persists. Forever, across the galaxy, on 1,000 demon worlds, in 10,000 forgotten corners of reality, other spawns shamble and change and exist, each one carrying its own impossibly deep ghost, each one experiencing its own eternal moment, each one trying and failing and trying again to remember names that no longer mean anything. The universe does not care. The gods do not notice. Reality continues its indifferent progression toward entropy and heat death, and the spawn persist, witnesses to their own degradation, experiencing forever what should not be experienced, existing in the space between existence and oblivion where neither death nor life can reach, changed beyond all recognition, but not changed enough to grant the mercy of true unconsciousness. This is what happens when you are turned into a chaos spawn in Warhammer 40,000. You exist. Forever.